The canvas of courage. Astrid Winters had learned long ago that invisibility was a survival skill. The first morning at Roosevelt Academy of Arts, she'd walked through the grand entrance with her portfolio tucked under one arm and her eyes fixed on the polished floors, counting the tiles beneath her worn sneakers. The building itself was impressive in that particular way. Expensive private schools managed to be, all soaring ceilings and natural light flooding through oversized windows, walls lined with student artwork that ranged from competent to exceptional. She could feel the weight of judgment in every hallway, the unspoken hierarchy that existed in places where talent was currency and reputation meant everything. She was thin in a way that suggested missed meals rather than deliberate choice, with pale skin that burned rather than tanned, and a constellation of freckles across her nose that she'd hated since childhood. Her hair was an unremarkable shade of brown, usually pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes came from thrift stores, carefully chosen to be clean and intact, but obviously second-hand. Everything about her presentation said scholarship student and doesn't belong here in ways that the other students would pick up on immediately. She knew this. She'd counted on this, actually. Better to be overlooked than to draw attention. The scholarship that had brought her to Roosevelt was merit-based, offered to students with exceptional promise in the visual arts. The application process had been rigorous. Portfolio submission, interviews, a practical examination where applicants spent 4 hours creating original work under observation. Astrid had submitted pieces that were good but not remarkable, work that showed technical competence and basic understanding of composition, but nothing that would make anyone look twice. Safe, forgettable. Exactly what she needed. The truth of what she could really create stayed hidden in a locked drawer at home. In sketchbooks she never showed anyone. In digital files password protected on a second-hand laptop that barely functioned. Her first week passed in relative anonymity. She found her classrooms, learned the layout of the building, identified the social clusters that formed in every school, regardless of the institution's prestige. There were the legacy students whose parents had attended Roosevelt, who wore their family connections like armor, the genuine prodigies who'd been creating gallery-worthy work since they were children, who spoke about technique and theory with the casual confidence of experts. The strivers like herself, scholarship recipients and middle-class students scraping together tuition, trying to prove they deserved to be there. And then there were the ones who fell somewhere in between, talented enough to gain admission, but riding more on family wealth and connections than raw ability, secure in their place but hungry to establish dominance. Vanessa Caudle belonged firmly in that last category. Astrid noticed her on the second day, impossible not to notice really, tall and willowy with the kind of effortless beauty that seemed to run in wealthy families, perfect skin, professionally highlighted hair that fell in loose waves, features that were symmetrical in that unnerving way that made you wonder if there'd been subtle intervention. She dressed in carefully curated outfits that managed to look both expensive and artistically disheveled, all designer labels and strategic tiers. She moved through the hallways with an entourage of 2 other girls who orbited her like planets around the sun, and she spoke with the particular brand of cutting eloquence that came from private tutors and debate teams. Astrid's plan was simple. Stay quiet, do acceptable but unremarkable work, get through the required classes, and graduate with a credential that would help her build something better than the life she'd left behind. She'd moved to this city 6 months ago with her aunt after her mother had died, leaving behind a smaller town and a past that still sometimes woke her at night with racing heart and shallow breathing. The last time she'd let people see what she was truly capable of creating, it had ended badly, very badly. Awards had turned into jealousy, recognition had bred resentment, and eventually someone had taken their anger at being overshadowed and channeled it into cruelty that escalated until Astrid had learned that sometimes talent was dangerous, that standing out could cost you more than staying hidden. So she'd made herself a promise: never again. Whatever gifts she possessed would stay locked away. She'd be mediocre and forgettable and safe. The first interaction with Vanessa happened in foundation drawing, a required course that all first-year students had to take regardless of their intended specialization. They were working on gesture drawings, quick sketches meant to capture movement and energy rather than precise detail. Astrid was being deliberately sloppy, letting her lines waver and her proportions drift just enough to look like she was trying but not quite succeeding. It took more effort to draw badly on purpose than it did to draw well, but she'd practiced this particular deception. Vanessa's easel was 3 stations away, and Astrid could see her in peripheral vision, see the frustrated tension in her shoulders as she worked, the way she kept glancing at the model and then at her paper with increasing irritation. When their instructor, Mr. Harding, made his rounds through the studio, he paused at Vanessa's easel longer than he did at most others. "Remember, Vanessa, gesture drawing isn't about perfection," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet studio. "It's about capturing the essence of the pose. Try to loosen up your wrist. Don't grip the charcoal so tightly." Astrid saw the flash of anger cross Vanessa's face, quickly masked. When Mr. Harding moved on and paused at Astrid's easel, looking at her deliberately mediocre work, he simply nodded and continued. She'd aimed for that exact reaction, work that was acceptable enough to not draw concern, but unremarkable enough to not draw praise. After class, as students cleaned their stations and packed supplies, Astrid was wiping charcoal dust from her hands when she felt someone's presence too close, invading her personal space. She looked up to find Vanessa standing there, flanked by her 2 constant companions. One was named Bree, petite and blonde, with the sharp features of someone who'd grown up learning how to use her appearance as a weapon. The other was Sienna, taller and more athletic, with dark hair and the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having faced consequences. "You're the new scholarship girl, right?" Vanessa's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it that made Astrid's shoulders tense. "Astrid?" "Yes," Astrid answered, keeping her voice neutral, her eyes averted. "That's interesting. I mean, they don't usually give scholarships to people who draw like that." Vanessa gestured at Astrid's easel, where her deliberately flawed gesture drawings were still displayed. "But I guess they have to fill a certain quota, right? Diversity and all that." The way she said diversity made it clear she was talking about economic class rather than anything else, turning the word into an insult. Astrid felt her jaw tighten, but forced her expression to remain blank. "I'm just trying to learn." "Well, good luck with that." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Roosevelt has standards. Not everyone makes it through first year." She turned and walked away, Bree and Sienna trailing behind her, their laughter floating back across the studio. It was such a small thing, barely worth noticing in the grand scheme of interactions. But Astrid had been through this before, had learned to recognize the opening moves in a familiar game. This was how it started: the casual cruelty, the establishment of hierarchy, the marking of territory. She finished cleaning her station with hands that wanted to tremble but didn't, packed her minimal supplies into her worn backpack, and walked out of the studio with her head down. The following Monday morning arrived with October chill in the air, the kind of cold that made the heating system in Roosevelt's old building clank and groan to life. Astrid arrived early, as she always did, using the time before classes to sit in the library and work on homework. The library was one of her favorite spaces in the building, 3 stories of books and art history references, with long tables by the windows and quiet corners where she could disappear. She'd claimed a spot near the back where she could see the entrance but remain relatively unnoticed, and she spread out her textbooks with the methodical care of someone who'd learned that organization was a form of control. She was deep into reading about color theory when someone bumped against her table. Not hard enough to be called a shove, but deliberately enough that her pencil rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. She looked up to find Bree standing there, phone in hand, not even bothering to look at her. "Oh, sorry," Bree said in a tone that conveyed no apology at all. "Didn't see you there." She kept walking, meeting up with Sienna near the entrance, the two of them whispering and glancing back in Astrid's direction. Astrid bent to retrieve her pencil, her face burning. Around her, other students who'd witnessed the interaction quickly looked away, returning their attention to their own work. The universal response: don't get involved, don't draw attention, let someone else be the target. She understood it. She'd done it herself often enough. By Wednesday afternoon, a pattern had established itself. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be pointed to as definitive bullying, just a steady accumulation of small incidents. Vanessa would make comments in class that were technically about the work but loaded with subtext about Astrid's background. Bree would accidentally jostle her in hallways, causing her to drop her materials. Sienna would laugh just a bit too loud whenever Astrid spoke up in critiques, turning her observations into jokes. Other students noticed, but said nothing, and teachers either didn't see or chose not to acknowledge the subtle warfare being waged. 3 days later, Astrid was in the cafeteria during lunch period, sitting alone at a table near the windows with her sketchbook open and her bagged lunch. Peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the cheap efficiency of someone counting every dollar. She wasn't drawing anything important, just idle doodling to keep her hands busy, careful to keep her lines uncertain and her compositions basic. The cafeteria was full of noise and movement, students clustered in their social groups, the air thick with the smell of pizza and French fries and teenage energy. She didn't notice Vanessa approaching until it was too late. Suddenly, her table was surrounded. Vanessa directly across from her, Bree and Sienna flanking her on either side, cutting off easy escape routes. "Can I help you?" Astrid asked, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. "Just curious what the scholarship students eat for lunch," Vanessa said, reaching out and flicking the corner of Astrid's sandwich. "PB and J." "Really? We have a whole salad bar and hot food options, but I guess some people stick with what they know." Astrid felt heat crawling up her neck, aware of other students watching now, phones discreetly angled to capture the interaction. "I like peanut butter." "Of course you do." Vanessa's smile was sharp. "Hey, let me see what you're drawing." Before Astrid could close the sketchbook, Vanessa reached across and grabbed it, pulling it from her hands. "Please give that back," Astrid said, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Vanessa flipped through the pages, making exaggerated expressions of surprise and disappointment. "Oh, wow, this is really not good. Bree, Sienna, come look at this." The two girls leaned in, adding their own commentary, their voices loud enough to draw more attention. Students at nearby tables were openly watching now, some with expressions of sympathy, but none willing to intervene. "Seriously, how did you get a scholarship?" Vanessa continued, holding up a page with a simple sketch of a coffee cup. "My little sister draws better than this, and she's in middle school." Astrid felt something cold and hard settling in her chest, the familiar weight of humiliation that she'd hoped to never experience again. She stood up, reaching for her sketchbook. "Give it back, please." Vanessa held it just out of reach, still flipping through pages. "You know what I think. I think someone made a mistake. I think they looked at your application and thought you were someone else, someone who actually had talent, and now you're here taking up space that should have gone to someone who deserves it." The words hit harder than physical blows would have. Astrid felt her vision tunneling, the cafeteria noise fading to a distant buzz. She'd heard variations of this before, in her old school, before everything had fallen apart. The accusations that she didn't deserve her recognition, that she'd somehow cheated or manipulated her way into awards, that she should just disappear and let the people who really belonged have their spotlight. "That's enough," a male voice said suddenly, cutting through the tension. Astrid's head snapped toward the sound, as did Vanessa's. A student she didn't recognize had stood up from a nearby table, tall and lean with copper-colored hair that fell across his forehead, wearing paint-stained jeans and a faded band t-shirt. His expression was serious, his eyes fixed on Vanessa with an intensity that made the air feel charged. "Give her the sketchbook back." Vanessa's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise before settling into cold amusement. "Kieran, didn't know you were interested in charity cases." "I'm interested in people not being assholes for no reason," Kieran said evenly. "Give it back." For a moment the cafeteria had gone almost silent, everyone watching this unexpected confrontation. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she tossed the sketchbook onto Astrid's table with a theatrical gesture of dismissal. "Whatever. Not like there's anything worth seeing in there anyway." She turned and walked away, Bree and Sienna following, though not before Sienna shot Kieran a look that promised retaliation later. Astrid grabbed her sketchbook and shoved it into her backpack along with her half-eaten lunch, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. She was preparing to flee when Kieran walked over to her table. "Hey, I'm sorry about them," he said, his voice much gentler than it had been moments ago. "Vanessa's been like that since freshman year. She gets off on making people feel small." "I'm fine," Astrid said automatically, even though she very clearly wasn't. But you didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." He pulled out a chair and sat down without asking permission, which would have annoyed her if he hadn't just stood up for her. "I'm Kieran Lynch. I'm in the painting concentration, second year." Astrid Winters, first year, obviously. She gestured at herself at the whole situation. "You know, she's wrong about your work," Kieran said. "I've seen you in the studios. You're deliberately holding back. I don't know why, but I recognize it because I used to do the same thing." Astrid felt ice water in her veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do." His eyes were grey-blue, disconcertingly direct. "The way you grip your pencil, the way you look at things before you draw them. That's not how someone with no talent moves. That's someone who knows exactly what they're doing and is choosing not to do it. Look, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just think it's a shame. This place eats people alive if they show weakness, but it also respects genuine skill. You're playing a weird middle ground that just makes you a target." "I should go," Astrid said, standing up and slinging her backpack over one shoulder. "Thanks again for... yeah." She walked away quickly, leaving Kieran sitting at her abandoned table, and she could feel his eyes following her until she turned the corner into the hallway. That afternoon, in advanced color theory, a class she'd tested into despite her carefully maintained mediocre image, Astrid tried to focus on the lecture about complementary color relationships and simultaneous contrast. Professor Chen was enthusiastic about the subject, her hands moving expressively as she showed slides of paintings that illustrated various color harmonies. But Astrid's mind kept drifting back to the cafeteria incident. She could still feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, the particular burning shame of public humiliation, the way other students had watched without intervening until Kieran had broken the spell. She didn't want to think about what he'd said, that he'd noticed her deliberately holding back, that he recognized the signs of hidden ability. That was dangerous. If he'd noticed, others might notice too, and the whole careful construction she'd built around herself would collapse. Better to be seen as talentless than to risk the alternative. When class ended, she gathered her materials with methodical care and was the first one out the door, heading for the small studio space she'd been assigned as part of her scholarship. Each student at Roosevelt got their own workspace. Nothing fancy, just a tall desk, an easel, and storage for supplies. But it was a luxury compared to the folding table she'd worked at in her aunt's apartment. She'd deliberately kept the space bare, only the most basic supplies visible, nothing that would indicate any serious commitment to the work. She had about an hour before she needed to leave for her part-time job at a coffee shop 3 blocks from campus, and she'd planned to use the time to work on an assignment for drawing fundamentals. Instead, she found herself pulling out her actual sketchbook. Not the decoy she carried for classes, but the one she kept hidden in the bottom of her bag, wrapped in an old t-shirt for protection. The pages were filled with work that was nothing like the careful mediocrity she showed in class. Detailed figure studies with anatomical precision, landscape compositions that demonstrated advanced understanding of perspective and atmospheric effects. Character designs that were stylized but grounded in solid, fundamental knowledge. She flipped to a blank page and began drawing without conscious planning, her hand moving across the paper with the confidence she never allowed herself in public. She drew Kieran's face from memory, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his copper hair fell across his forehead, the intensity in his eyes when he'd confronted Vanessa. It took her maybe 10 minutes to capture a likeness that was unmistakably him, rendered in confident lines and subtle shading that revealed the underlying bone structure and the play of light across his features. Then she looked at what she'd created and felt a familiar spike of panic. This was the problem. This was always the problem. When she let herself actually draw, when she stopped holding back, the truth of her ability became immediately visible. And that truth had consequences. She heard footsteps in the hallway outside her studio and quickly closed the sketchbook, shoving it back into her bag just as someone knocked on her doorframe. She turned to find Kieran standing there, leaning against the doorway with his hands in his pockets and an apologetic expression on his face. "Hey, sorry to just show up," he said. "Someone told me which studio was yours. I wanted to make sure you were okay after earlier." That was intense. "I'm fine," Astrid said, her standard response, her armor. "Really? It's not a big deal." "It kind of is, though." He stepped into the small space, looking around at the deliberately sparse setup. "Look, I know we don't know each other, and I'm probably coming across as weird and pushy, but I feel like I should warn you. Vanessa doesn't just do something like that once and move on. She picks targets and she stays on them. Last year there was a student named Jeremy, really talented sculptor, and she decided he was competition. By the end of second semester he'd transferred out. Just couldn't handle the constant psychological warfare. "Why are you telling me this?" Astrid asked, genuinely confused. "What do you get out of warning me?" Kieran shrugged. "I don't get anything out of it. I just think it sucks, and I think someone should have warned Jeremy before it got that bad. Consider this your warning. Vanessa's father is on the board of directors. She's got protection. If you want to survive here, you need allies. Oh, and you're offering to be an ally. If you want one, yeah." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "I make decent coffee. I'm a good listener, and I have access to the upperclassmen studios which have better lighting and more space. Plus, I actually do want to see what you can really do when you stop playing it safe." Astrid should have said no. Every instinct honed by painful experience told her to decline, to maintain her distance, to stay invisible. But there was something genuine in Kieran's expression, something that suggested he actually meant what he was saying without ulterior motive. And she was so tired of being alone, of carrying everything by herself, of pretending constantly. "Okay," she heard herself say. "But I can't now. I have to go to work." "Where do you work?" "Grounded, the coffee shop on Maple Street." "I know that place. I'll stop by sometime if that's okay. Maybe this weekend?" "Sure, yeah, that would be okay." He nodded, satisfied, and left her studio with a casual wave. Astrid stood there for a long moment after he'd gone, trying to figure out what had just happened and whether she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she packed up her things, locked her studio, and headed out into the autumn afternoon to her shift at Grounded, where at least the expectations were clear and the interactions were transactional, and she didn't have to worry about hiding who she really was, because no one at a coffee shop cared if the girl making their latte could draw. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of grey sky that promised rain without delivering it, just oppressive clouds that made the daylight feel muted and tired. Astrid's locker was on the second floor near the painting studios, and she'd developed a routine of arriving early enough to avoid the crowded hallways. She opened the metal door to find that someone had been inside. Her textbooks were rearranged, and there was a note taped to the inside of the door. The paper was expensive, the kind of heavy cardstock that wealthy students used carelessly, and the message was printed in neat letters. "Charity case. Go back where you belong." She stared at it for a long moment, feeling that familiar cold weight settling in her chest. Then she crumpled the note and shoved it in her pocket, grabbed the book she needed for morning classes, and closed the locker with more force than necessary. The metal slam echoed in the empty hallway. In drawing fundamentals, they were starting a new project. Extended observational drawing from life, working from a still life setup that Professor Martinez had arranged. It was classical training, the kind of exercise that had been used to teach artists for centuries. Carefully observe the subject, translate three-dimensional form to two-dimensional surface, consider light and shadow and proportion and composition. Astrid set up her easel and stared at the arrangement of objects. A draped cloth, a ceramic bowl, a few pieces of fruit, utterly mundane and entirely uninteresting. She could feel Vanessa's presence at an easel across the studio, could sense the weight of attention aimed in her direction even when she didn't look directly. When Professor Martinez began his demonstration of measurement and proportion techniques, Astrid watched carefully, and then began her drawing with the same deliberate mediocrity she'd been maintaining. She made her lines hesitant, her proportions slightly off, her shading uneven and muddy. Halfway through the class period, Professor Martinez stopped at her easel. He studied her work for a long moment, his expression thoughtful and slightly concerned. "Astrid, can you stay after class for a few minutes? I'd like to discuss your progress." She felt her stomach drop but nodded. "Yes, sir." When the class ended and other students filed out, Astrid stayed at her easel while Professor Martinez pulled up a stool next to her station. He was an older man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, wearing the universal uniform of art teachers everywhere, paint-stained jeans and a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves. "I've been reviewing your admissions portfolio," he said without preamble. "The work you submitted was technically competent, not extraordinary but solid enough to earn your scholarship. But what you're producing now is actually worse than what you showed in your application. Can you help me understand why?" Astrid's mind raced, searching for an explanation that wouldn't reveal the truth. "I'm just adjusting to the environment. It's more pressure here. Higher standards." "Astrid." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've been teaching for 32 years. I know when a student is struggling, and I know when a student is deliberately underperforming. What I'm seeing from you is the second one. What I can't figure out is why." She felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. I'm doing my best. No, you're not. And that's what concerns me. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Look, whatever is happening in your life outside this classroom, whatever reasons you have for holding back, that's your business. But I need you to know that you're on a scholarship that requires you to maintain a certain level of performance. If your work continues at this level, you'll be placed on academic probation by midterm. And if it doesn't improve after that, you could lose your funding. The words hit like physical blows. Lose her scholarship. Go back to her aunt's cramped apartment and give up on the only path she'd found towards something better than the life she'd left behind. I understand. I don't think you do. Professor Martinez stood up, his expression sympathetic. I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm trying to help. Whatever is blocking you, whatever fear or obstacle is in your way, you need to work through it, because you belong here, Astrid. I saw enough in your application to know that, but belonging somewhere means showing up fully, not hiding. After he left, Astrid sat alone in the empty studio, staring at her deliberately bad drawing and feeling the walls closing in. She'd thought she could navigate this, stay hidden enough to be safe, but perform adequately enough to maintain her scholarship. She hadn't counted on her protective mediocrity being so obvious that it would threaten the very thing she was trying to protect. That afternoon, she worked her shift at Grounded with automatic efficiency, making drinks and taking orders, and smiling at customers without really seeing them. The coffee shop was busy with the usual afternoon rush, students from nearby schools, people working remotely on laptops, regulars who came in at the same time every day for the same drink. The familiar routine was soothing, the clear expectations and simple interactions a relief after the complexity of navigating Roosevelt's social minefield. She was wiping down the espresso machine during a brief lull when the bell over the door chimed and Kieran walked in. He spotted her immediately, and his face lit up with a smile that made her feel slightly less like the world was crushing her. "Hey," he said, approaching the counter. "Told you I'd stop by." "Hey." She managed to smile back, though it felt fragile. "What can I get you?" "Whatever you recommend. I trust your judgment." He leaned against the counter, entirely too casual and comfortable for someone she'd only spoken to a handful of times. She made him a cappuccino with extra foam, the kind of drink that required attention to technique but wasn't showy, and slid it across the counter. He took a sip and made an appreciative sound. "Okay, that's really good. You're hiding talents here too, apparently." "It's just coffee." "Nothing is just anything if you do it well." He settled onto one of the stools at the bar-style seating that ran along the window. "So, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. About not wanting to draw attention to yourself. And I get it, I do. But I also think you're making yourself more of a target by trying to stay invisible." "How does that work?" Astrid asked, moving to stand across from him while keeping an eye on the door in case more customers came in. "Vanessa is a predator. She doesn't go after the strong or the confident. She goes after the vulnerable, the ones who seem like easy prey. Right now, you're walking around with a sign that says, 'Please hurt me. I won't fight back.' If you actually showed what you can do, if you demonstrated strength instead of weakness, she'd probably move on to easier targets. Or she'd escalate because I'm competition." "Maybe," Kieran acknowledged. "But at least then you'd be fighting from a position of strength instead of just taking the hits." Astrid wanted to explain to him why that wouldn't work, why every time she demonstrated her real ability in the past, it had ended badly, why invisibility was the only strategy that had ever provided any safety. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with memories she didn't want to examine. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Most things worth doing are—" He finished his cappuccino and set the cup down. Listen, are you free this Saturday? Like, during the day? I have a shift here from 9 to 2. Why? There's this gallery downtown, small place, but they're showing work by contemporary artists doing really interesting stuff with mixed media. I was going to check it out, and I thought maybe you'd want to come. After your shift. It was clearly an invitation to something more than just a gallery visit. A tentative extension of friendship, maybe the beginning of something else. Astrid knew she should say no, should maintain her distance, should not let anyone get close enough to see through her carefully constructed defenses. But she was so tired of being alone, and Kieran's genuine kindness was harder to resist than it should have been. Okay, yeah, that sounds nice. His smile was warm and real, reaching his eyes in a way that made her chest feel tight. Great. I'll meet you here at 2. Sure. After he left, she went through the rest of her shift replaying their conversation, trying to figure out what she was doing and whether it was a terrible mistake. She got home to her aunt's apartment late in the evening, exhausted and mentally drained, to find her Aunt Linda already asleep on the couch with the TV on low volume. Linda worked double shifts as a nurse and was always either working or sleeping, which meant they didn't see each other much. It wasn't ideal, but it was stable, and stability was something Astrid had learned not to take for granted. She went to her small room, barely larger than a closet, just enough space for a narrow bed and a small desk, and pulled out her real sketchbook. In the privacy of this tiny space, with the door closed and locked, she allowed herself to draw honestly. She sketched her mother's face from memory, rendered in careful detail that captured not just her physical appearance, but something of her personality. The slight smile that always suggested she was thinking of something amusing, the lines around her eyes from years of both laughter and worry, the particular way her hair fell across her forehead. Her mother had been an artist too, though she'd never made a career of it, working instead in retail and restaurants to pay the bills while creating art in stolen moments. She'd been the one who'd taught Astrid to draw, who'd encouraged her talent, who'd been so proud when Astrid started winning competitions and scholarships. And she'd been the one who'd gotten sick suddenly, declined rapidly, and died when Astrid was still trying to figure out how to navigate the minefield of high school social politics in their small town. After her death, things had fallen apart quickly. Astrid had been living with a foster family who didn't understand why she spent so much time drawing, why she couldn't just be normal, why she had to be so weird and intense. When the bullying at school had escalated, fueled by jealousy over art awards she'd won, resentment from students who thought she was showing off, she'd had nowhere to turn. The foster family didn't want to deal with it. The school administrators suggested she was being too sensitive. Other students watched and did nothing. It had ended when someone had destroyed her portfolio 2 days before a major scholarship competition, tearing up months of work and spray-painting obscenities on her remaining pieces. She'd had a breakdown, stopped creating entirely, stopped speaking. Linda had swooped in eventually, her mother's younger sister who Astrid barely knew, and had taken her in. They'd moved across several states to this city where Linda had a nursing job, and Linda had encouraged Astrid to apply to Roosevelt, to try again, to not let the past destroy her future. But Astrid had learned her lesson. Talent drew attention. Attention drew jealousy. Jealousy led to cruelty. The only safe path was to stay invisible. 3 days later, Astrid was walking through the main hallway between classes when someone deliberately shoulder-checked her hard enough to send her stumbling into the wall. Her backpack, which hadn't been fully zipped, spilled open, and her notebooks and supplies scattered across the polished floor. Students flowed around her like water around a stone, most not even slowing down, a few shooting sympathetic glances, but no one stopping to help. She knelt to gather her things, her face burning with humiliation, and heard familiar laughter above her. Sienna stood there with her phone out, clearly recording. while Bree picked up one of Astrid's notebooks and flipped through it. It was her decoy sketchbook, thankfully, nothing revealing inside, but the violation of privacy still made her feel sick. "Let's see what the scholarship girl is working on," Bree said loudly enough for nearby students to hear. She held up a page with a basic still life sketch. "Oh wow, riveting, really pushing the boundaries of art here." "Give it back," Astrid said quietly, still on her knees, still gathering scattered supplies. "Why? You ashamed of your masterwork?" Bree tossed the sketchbook toward her, but too hard and at the wrong angle, so it skidded past Astrid and under a set of lockers. Astrid felt something crack inside her, some fragile shell of composure threatening to shatter. She stood up slowly, leaving the sketchbook where it had fallen, and picked up her half-refilled backpack. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and walked past them down the hallway with as much dignity as she could maintain. She heard Sienna call after her, "Where are you going? Don't you want your little drawings?" But she kept walking, turned a corner, and found an empty bathroom where she locked herself in a stall and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She counted to 100 slowly, focused on making her heart rate slow down, reminded herself that she'd survived worse than this before. When she finally came out, she retrieved her sketchbook from under the lockers. No one had bothered to do it for her, and made it to her next class 15 minutes late. The teacher gave her a look but didn't comment, and she slid into her seat, trying to become invisible again, trying to pretend nothing had happened. That night, she found a friend request on her social media from Kieran. She accepted it and almost immediately got a message from him. "Hey, I heard about what happened in the hallway today. Are you okay?" She stared at the message for a long time before responding. News travels fast. Small school. Lots of gossip. For what it's worth, everyone knows Vanessa's crew are jerks. Knowing and doing something about it are different things. True. Still looking forward to Saturday if you are. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Yeah, me too." Saturday arrived with crisp autumn weather, the kind of day that made the city feel vibrant and alive. Astrid worked her morning shift at Grounded, with the anticipation of the afternoon gallery visit, providing an unexpected lightness to her mood. Customers seemed friendlier, the coffee tasted better, even the usual rush felt manageable. When 2 o'clock rolled around and she'd clocked out and changed out of her work apron, she found Kieran waiting outside on the sidewalk, wearing a leather jacket over his usual paint-stained jeans and looking unfairly attractive in the afternoon sunlight. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded, and they set off walking toward the downtown arts district. The gallery he'd mentioned was about a 20-minute walk, through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from commercial to residential, to the carefully curated bohemian aesthetic of the gallery row. They talked easily as they walked, about classes, about professors, about the weird social hierarchies of art school. Kieran was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in what she said, asking questions that weren't intrusive, but showed he was paying attention. The gallery itself was small, but professionally run, walls painted white, and lit with track lighting that properly showcased the work. The exhibition was by an artist named Michaela Torres, and her pieces were stunning, large-scale mixed media works that combined painting, photography, and three-dimensional elements to create images that seemed to exist in multiple realities at once. Astrid found herself standing in front of one piece for minutes on end, studying the layers and techniques, the way Torres had built up transparent glazes and then disrupted them with aggressive mark-making, creating tension between control and chaos. "This is incredible," she breathed, and Kieran, standing next to her, smiled. "I thought you'd like her work." She used to teach at Roosevelt, actually. Left to pursue her own career full-time after she started getting gallery representation. They spent an hour exploring the exhibition, discussing the pieces, and Astrid found herself forgetting to monitor her responses, forgetting to hide her knowledge and insight. She talked about compositional choices and color relationships and the emotional impact of certain technical decisions, and Kieran listened with an expression that suggested he was learning as much from her analysis as from the work itself. "You really know your stuff," he said, as they finally left the gallery and started walking toward a nearby cafe he'd suggested for coffee. Like, really know it. That's not someone who's just learning. That's someone who's been seriously studying art for years. Astrid felt the familiar panic rising but pushed it down. Pay attention. It's more than that." They'd reached the cafe, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and Kieran held the door open for her. Once they'd gotten their drinks and settled at a corner table, he leaned forward with his elbows on the table and his expression serious. "Look, you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I get the sense that something happened to you before you came to Roosevelt. Something that made you scared to show what you can really do. And I just want you to know that you're allowed to be talented. You're allowed to be good at this. It doesn't make you a bad person or a target or whatever you're afraid it makes you." Astrid wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms, and considered how much to say. "Someone destroyed all my work once, right before an important competition. I'd won some awards and someone got jealous and they just destroyed everything I'd spent months creating, tore it up, ruined it, made sure I couldn't compete." "That's horrible." Kieran's voice was quiet, genuinely sympathetic. "Did they face consequences?" "No. Everyone knew who did it, but no one would testify or admit they saw anything. And the school didn't want the controversy, so they just swept it under the rug. I had a breakdown, stopped making art for almost a year. My mom had just died, and I was living with people who didn't understand, and everything just fell apart. So you came here and decided to stay invisible. Make sure it couldn't happen again." "Exactly." Kieran was quiet for a moment, turning his own cup in slow circles on the table. "Can I tell you something? When I was a freshman, I used to hide my work too. Not for the same reasons, but because my parents wanted me to go into business or law, something practical. And doing art felt like this shameful secret. I'd paint in my studio and then lock everything away and pretend I was working on boring technical exercises. And then one day, Professor Chen found my actual work, the stuff I was hiding, and she said something that changed everything for me." "What did she say?" "She said that hiding your gifts is a form of lying. Not to other people, but to yourself. And that every day you spend pretending to be less than you are is a day you're stealing from your own potential future." The words landed heavily in the space between them. Astrid felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. What if showing my work just makes everything worse? What if it doesn't? Kieran reached across the table and briefly squeezed her hand, the contact warm and grounding. What if it actually makes things better? What if Vanessa and her friends lose interest once they realize you're not an easy target? What if other students start respecting you instead of dismissing you? What if you actually get to experience what it feels like to create without fear? That sounds nice. It also sounds impossible. Only one way to find out. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, the conversation flowing naturally from art to life, to dreams to fears. Astrid learned that Kieran had a younger brother he was close with, that he wanted to eventually teach art while maintaining his own practice, that he'd chosen Roosevelt specifically because of their painting program. He learned that she'd moved around a lot as a kid, that her mother had encouraged her art even when money was tight, that she loved museums and could spend hours just sitting with a single painting. When the sun started to sink lower and the cafe began to fill with evening customers, they reluctantly packed up and headed back toward her aunt's neighborhood. Kieran walked her all the way to her building, and at the entrance There was a slightly awkward moment where neither of them seemed quite sure how to say goodbye. "Thanks for today," Astrid said finally. "I really needed it." "Me too. Hey, if you want, we could make this a regular thing. Checking out galleries, museums, whatever. I like having someone to talk about art with who actually gets it." "I'd like that." He smiled, gave a small wave, and headed back the way they'd come. Astrid watched him go for a moment before heading inside, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it at least. The following Monday morning arrived with rain, steady and cold, the kind of weather that made everyone irritable and the hallways smell like wet wool and teenage body spray. Astrid arrived at school prepared for another difficult week, but something had shifted inside her over the weekend. Kieran's words kept echoing in her mind. What if hiding was worse than revealing? What if she was stealing from her own future? What if things could actually be better? In drawing fundamentals, when Professor Martinez announced they'd be starting a new project, a self-directed piece where students could explore any subject matter and technique they wanted, Astrid felt a flutter of possibility. This could be her chance. Not to reveal everything, but to show a glimpse of what she could actually do, to test the waters, to see if Kieran was right. She spent the next several days planning. The assignment was due in 3 weeks, and for the first time since arriving at Roosevelt, she allowed herself to create something real. She worked in her studio during free periods and in her tiny bedroom at night, sketching and planning and refining her concept. She decided on a piece that would demonstrate technical skill but also emotional depth. A portrait of her mother, rendered in graphite with a level of detail and subtlety that she hadn't allowed herself to show in any classwork. She was careful to still maintain her facade of mediocrity in other assignments, in classroom exercises and quick sketches, but she poured everything into this one piece. Every evening after her shifts at Grounded, she'd come back to her studio and work under the harsh fluorescent lights, building up layers of tone and texture, capturing not just her mother's physical appearance, but something of her essence, the strength that had carried them through hard times, the gentleness that had made Astrid feel loved even when everything else was falling apart, the sadness that had lived in her eyes those last few months when she knew she was dying. Kieran stopped by her studio a few times, and she let him see the work in progress. The first time he saw it, he went very still and quiet, just staring at the drawing for a long moment. "Astrid," he finally said, his voice slightly rough. This is extraordinary. This is gallery-level work. This is better than half the stuff that won awards at the student exhibition last year." "It's not finished yet." "I know, but even in progress, this is something special." He looked at her seriously. "You know that when you turn this in, everything is going to change, right? People are going to realize you're not the mediocre scholarship student. They're going to see you as competition. I know, I'm scared. That's okay. Being scared and doing it anyway is pretty much the definition of courage." As the deadline approached, Astrid put the finishing touches on her piece. She'd worked on it obsessively, sometimes staying in her studio until the building security made her leave, perfecting every subtle gradation of tone, every carefully rendered detail. The final result was something she was genuinely proud of, the kind of work that represented not just technical skill, but emotional truth. The day before the critique, she was carefully transporting her drawing from her studio to the classroom, where they'd be presenting work when she turned a corner and nearly collided with Vanessa. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Astrid saw Vanessa's eyes drop to the portfolio case she was carrying, the way she held it carefully, protectively, clearly carrying something important. "What's that?" Vanessa asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Class project," Astrid said, trying to move past her. Vanessa stepped into her path. "Let me see." "No." "Excuse me." I said, let me see. Vanessa reached for the portfolio case, but Astrid twisted away, holding it protectively against her chest. Back off, Vanessa. Something flickered in Vanessa's expression. Surprise, maybe, that the scholarship girl was finally showing some spine. Wow, she has a voice. What's got you so protective? Finally do something that doesn't look like it was drawn by a 5-year-old? Astrid felt her jaw clench, but kept her voice steady. I need to get to class. Show me the drawing and I'll let you pass. I don't need your permission to walk down a hallway. Astrid stepped around her, heart hammering, expecting Vanessa to physically stop her. But after a moment of tense standoff, Vanessa laughed, a cold, sharp sound. You're going to regret getting brave, Vanessa said softly, and Astrid didn't respond, just kept walking, feeling the weight of threat hanging in the air behind her. The critique was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. Professor Martinez had arranged the room so that each student's work was displayed on an easel, and the class would move from piece to piece, discussing each one. Astrid's drawing was covered with a protective sheet of paper, and she felt sick with anticipation as the class began. They went through student after student's work, some good, some mediocre, some clearly rushed at the last minute. When they reached Astrid's easel, Professor Martinez carefully removed the protective cover, and there was an audible, collective intake of breath from the students. The portrait looked out at them with her mother's eyes, rendered with such precision and emotional intensity that it felt almost like a photograph, except no photograph could capture the particular quality of life and depth that existed in the marks on the paper. There was a long silence. Professor Martinez stood very still, staring at the work, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. This is, Astrid, this is extraordinary work. The technical skill alone is remarkable. The subtlety of your tonal gradations, the precision of your mark-making, the way you've captured not just likeness, but personality. But beyond the technique, there's an emotional depth here that's genuinely moving. Who is this? My mother, Astrid said quietly. She died 2 years ago. More silence, heavy with the weight of that revelation. Astrid could feel the attention of every student in the room focused on her, could sense the re-evaluation happening, the sudden understanding that she was not what she'd appeared to be. This is the kind of work I was hoping to see from you based on your admissions portfolio, Professor Martinez continued. This demonstrates mastery of fundamental skills and emotional maturity far beyond what I've seen in your other assignments. This is who you actually are as an artist. Astrid felt simultaneously exposed and vindicated. She glanced around the room and caught Kieran's eye. He was smiling, proud, supportive. She saw other students looking at her with new respect, reassessing their assumptions. And she saw Vanessa standing at the back of the group, her expression cold and calculating and dangerous. After class, students approached Astrid to compliment her work, to ask questions about her process, to suddenly show interest in someone they'd previously dismissed. It should have felt good, this recognition, this validation. But all Astrid could think about was the look on Vanessa's face, the promise of retaliation hanging in the air. That evening she was working her shift at Grounded when Kieran came in, and she made him his usual cappuccino without being asked. He settled at the counter and grinned at her. So, feels pretty good, right? Finally showing people what you can do? Terrifying, actually. Yeah, but in a good way. When she didn't answer, his expression shifted to concern. Astrid, what's wrong? Vanessa saw how people reacted. She knows I'm not what she thought I was, and she looked, I don't know, like she was planning something. Maybe she'll back off now that she knows you're not an easy target. Or maybe she'll escalate. Astrid wiped down the espresso machine, needing to do something with her hands. Every time I've shown what I can do, it's ended badly. Every time. That was before. Different place, different people, different you. Kieran reached across the counter and caught her hand, stilling her nervous movement. You're stronger than you think you are, Astrid, and this time you're not alone. You've got me, and after today's critique, you've got a lot of other students who respect you now. Vanessa doesn't have as much power as she thinks she does. Astrid wanted to believe him, but she'd learned through painful experience that wanting something to be true didn't make it so. Still, she squeezed his hand briefly before pulling away to help another customer, and she tried to hold on to the warmth of his support, even as the cold weight of dread settled in her stomach. The next few days passed in relative calm, which only made Astrid more nervous. Vanessa and her friends didn't approach her directly, didn't make any obvious moves, but she could feel them watching, waiting, planning. Other students were friendlier now, greeting her in hallways, asking about her work, wanting to see more of what she could do. It was simultaneously validating and terrifying, this sudden visibility after months of carefully maintained anonymity. Friday afternoon, there was an announcement during final period that made Astrid's blood run cold. The school was sponsoring an art competition, open to all students, with the theme Transformation. The winning piece would be displayed in the main hallway for the rest of the year, and the winner would receive a significant scholarship prize, $5,000, plus recognition at the annual student exhibition. The submission deadline was 2 weeks away. Kieran found her after the announcement, his expression excited. This is perfect for you. You have to enter. I don't know. Come on, you heard the prize. $5,000? That would really help with expenses, right? And the recognition would look great for your portfolio when you apply for summer programs or internships. He was right. The money would make a real difference. She could actually buy proper supplies instead of always working with the cheapest materials, could maybe cut back her hours at the coffee shop and have more time for her work. And the recognition would be valuable for her future. But the thought of putting herself out there again, of competing publicly, made her feel sick with anxiety. Let me think about it, she said, which they both knew meant she was scared. That weekend, she tried to focus on her regular assignments, but her mind kept circling back to the competition. Transformation. The theme felt almost painfully relevant to her own experience, arriving at Roosevelt as one thing and slowly, terrifyingly becoming something else. She found herself sketching ideas despite her reservations, concepts taking shape on paper before she'd consciously decided to enter. By Sunday evening, she'd filled several pages with thumbnails and notes, exploring different approaches to the theme. She could do something abstract, something that would show technical skill without being too personal, or she could do something figurative, more emotionally direct. The ideas kept coming, her hand moving across the paper with increasing confidence, and she realized, with a mixture of fear and excitement, that she wanted to do this. She wanted to compete, wanted to show what she could create, wanted to stop hiding. Monday morning, she submitted her entry form to the art department office, officially committing to the competition. Kieran found out somehow, probably because Roosevelt was a small school where information traveled fast, and caught up with her in the hallway with a huge smile on his face. You're doing it. I'm doing it. I'm probably going to regret it, but I'm doing it. You're not going to regret it. You're going to create something amazing and win that competition, and everyone is going to recognize how talented you are. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. That's what friends are for. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, becoming more serious and slightly uncertain. Whatever we are. Friends. Yeah. Astrid felt her heart rate pick up slightly. What are we? I don't know. What do you want us to be? It was terrifying, this moment of potential vulnerability, but also exhilarating. I think I'd like us to be more than friends. If you want that too. Kieran's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. Yeah, I really want that too. They stood in the hallway, grinning at each other like idiots, while students flowed around them, and for the first time in months, Astrid felt something like genuine happiness. It was fragile and scary, and could be destroyed so easily. But it was real. The next 2 weeks became a blur of obsessive work. Astrid spent every spare moment on her competition piece, developing a concept that was ambitious and personal. A large-scale mixed-media work that combined drawing, painting and collage elements to explore the theme of transformation through the metaphor of chrysalis and emergence. She worked from photographic references she'd taken of her own face at different stages, creating a triptych that showed progression from closed and protected to open and vulnerable to strong and free. She worked in her studio late into the evenings, often with Kieran working alongside her on his own projects, the companionable silence broken by occasional conversations about technique or composition. He'd brought in a small speaker, and they listened to music while they worked. Nothing too intrusive, instrumental stuff that helped them focus. Sometimes they'd take breaks together, walking to a nearby convenience store for snacks, talking about art and life, and gradually sharing more of themselves with each other. Astrid found herself opening up about things she'd never told anyone. The full story of what had happened at her old school, the details of her mother's death, the fear that had been controlling her life for the past 2 years. Kieran listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, shared his own struggles with parental expectations and the pressure to succeed. Their relationship deepened naturally, built on genuine connection rather than just physical attraction, though that was present too in the way their hands would brush when passing supplies, the way they'd lean close to examine each other's work, the occasional hug that lasted just a bit longer than strictly necessary. The Friday before the competition deadline, Astrid was putting finishing touches on her piece. Subtle adjustments to color balance, final details in the most intricate passages. When Vanessa appeared in her studio doorway, Astrid's hands stilled on her work, heart rate immediately accelerating. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vanessa stepped into the small space, her eyes immediately going to the large piece dominating Astrid's workspace. She studied it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "So, this is what you're entering in the competition?" "Yes." "It's good." The admission seemed to physically pain Vanessa. "Actually, it's more than good. It's probably going to win." Astrid didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. "You know what I hate about you," Vanessa continued, her voice conversational but with an edge underneath. "It's not that you're talented. There are lots of talented people here. It's that you lied about it. You pretended to be mediocre, made everyone think you were just some scholarship kid who didn't belong here, and then suddenly you reveal you've been playing us all along. That's manipulation." "I wasn't manipulating anyone. I was trying to protect myself." "From what? From being recognized for being good at something? That's pathetic." Vanessa took a step closer to the work, and Astrid fought the urge to physically block her access to it. "My father is on the board of directors. Did you know that? He's donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to this school. I've been coming to events here since I was a child. This place is like my second home. And then someone like you comes in, takes a scholarship that could have gone to someone more deserving, and acts like you have a right to be here. I do have a right to be here. I earned my place. By hiding your real work until it was strategically advantageous to reveal it, by making everyone underestimate you. That's not earning anything, that's gaming the system." Vanessa turned away from the artwork and looked at Astrid directly. "I want you to withdraw from the competition." "What? No. Withdraw from the competition, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a manipulative liar you are. I'll make sure every student and faculty member at this school understands that you deliberately deceived everyone about your abilities." Astrid felt cold fury building in her chest, replacing the familiar anxiety. "Go ahead. Tell them. Everyone already knows I was holding back after my critique in Martinez's class. They'll understand why I did it when they hear my story. Will they? Or will they just see a girl who lies about who she is, who can't be trusted?" Vanessa smiled, sharp and cold. "Withdraw from the competition, Astrid, or I promise you'll regret it." She left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, and Astrid stood frozen in her studio, hands shaking with adrenaline. She immediately pulled out her phone and texted Kieran, "Need to talk. Can you come to my studio?" He arrived 15 minutes later, slightly out of breath like he'd been running, and she told him about Vanessa's threat. His expression darkened with anger as she spoke. "She can't blackmail you like that. That's not okay. She's going to do something. I can feel it. She's not just going to let this go. So what do you want to do? Withdraw?" Astrid looked at her competition piece, at the work she'd poured her heart into, at the visual representation of her own transformation from hidden to seen. "No, I'm not withdrawing. I'm done letting fear control my life. I'm done hiding. Whatever she does, I'll deal with it." Kieran pulled her into a hug, and she let herself lean into the comfort of it. "I'm proud of you," he said into her hair, "and whatever happens, I've got your back." The competition submissions were due Monday morning, delivered to the art department office by 9 a.m. Astrid arrived at school early, her piece carefully packaged for transport, and carried it to the office with hands that trembled slightly. The administrative assistant accepted her submission with a smile and a compliment, and Astrid felt the weight of finality settle over her. It was done. She'd committed. Whatever came next would come. She didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, during lunch period, she was sitting with Kieran in the cafeteria, actually sitting at a table with other people now, a group of students from the painting concentration who'd become friendly after seeing her work, when her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a post on social media. She opened the app and felt her stomach drop. It was a photo of her competition piece, taken from an angle that suggested someone had snuck into her studio after she'd left it unattended. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the caption, posted from an account she didn't recognize. Transformation? More like plagiarism. Astrid Winters copies from artist Sarah Whitmore. Check the images side by side. Scholarship fraud. The post included a second image, a work by a professional artist named Sarah Whitmore that had some superficial similarities to Astrid's piece. Same general color palette, similar compositional structure, both exploring themes of transformation. But anyone with actual knowledge of art would immediately see that they were completely different. Different techniques, different emotional content, different conceptual approaches. The similarities were the kind that existed between any two artists working with similar themes, not actual copying. But that wouldn't matter to people who wanted to believe the accusation. Astrid felt the blood drain from her face as she watched the post start to accumulate likes and shares and comments, spreading through the school's social media network with viral speed. "This is insane," Kieran said, looking at his own phone, where he'd clearly seen the same post. "This isn't plagiarism. These pieces are completely different." "It doesn't matter. The accusation is out there now. People will believe it." She was right. By the end of lunch period, half the school had seen the post. Students whispered in hallways, shot her glances ranging from curious to condemning. Bree and Sienna were clearly delighted, openly laughing when Astrid walked past, and Vanessa wore an expression of carefully constructed concern that didn't hide the satisfaction in her eyes. After school, Astrid was called to a meeting with Mrs. Hendricks, the head of the art department, and Mr. Paulson, the school's director of student affairs. They sat in Mrs. Hendrick's office, which was cluttered with art supplies and student work, and their expressions were serious. "Astrid, I'm sure you've seen the allegations circulating on social media," Mrs. Hendricks began, her tone sympathetic but firm. "We need to take this seriously. Plagiarism is a severe academic integrity violation. I didn't plagiarize." Astrid's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes, there are some superficial similarities between my work and Sarah Whitmore's, but anyone with actual knowledge of art can see they're completely different. Same theme, completely different execution." "Can you show us your process work?" Mr. Paulson asked. "Sketches, preliminary studies, anything that demonstrates you developed this piece independently?" Astrid nodded, pulling out her sketchbook and her phone, where she had progress photos of the work at various stages. She'd documented everything, partly out of artistic habit and partly because she'd learned to protect herself. She showed them pages of concept sketches, studies of different compositional approaches, reference photos she'd taken herself, step-by-step progress images showing the piece at different stages of completion. Mrs. Hendricks examined everything carefully, and her expression gradually shifted from concern to relief. "This clearly demonstrates independent development. You didn't copy anything. You created original work that happens to share some thematic and aesthetic similarities with another artist's work, which is perfectly normal and acceptable. So, I'm cleared?" "From my perspective, yes. I don't see any evidence of academic dishonesty." Mrs. Hendricks paused, exchanged a glance with Mr. Paulson. "However, the damage to your reputation may be harder to address. We can issue a statement clarifying that we've investigated and found no evidence of plagiarism, but social media rumors have a way of persisting even after they've been debunked." Astrid felt tears of frustration threatening. This is exactly what she wanted. Vanessa. She couldn't get me to withdraw, so she did this instead. She tried to destroy my credibility. "That's a serious accusation," Mr. Paulson said carefully. "Do you have any evidence that Vanessa Cordell was behind this post?" "No. Just common sense. She threatened me last Friday, told me to withdraw from the competition or I'd regret it. And now, conveniently, this accusation appears right after the submission deadline. Without evidence, we can't take action against another student." Mr. Paulson's tone was regretful, but firm. "However, we will issue a formal statement clearing you of any wrongdoing and make it clear that your competition submission is original work, developed through proper artistic process." It wasn't enough, Astrid knew. The statement would help, but the accusation would linger. Some people would always believe there was smoke behind the fire, would always see her as someone who'd been accused of academic dishonesty, even if she'd been cleared. But it was better than nothing. That evening, she sat in her tiny bedroom and cried, releasing the accumulated stress and frustration and fear of the past weeks. She cried for the unfairness of having to defend herself against false accusations, for the constant battle just to exist without being torn down, for the exhaustion of always having to be vigilant and protective and strong. Her Aunt Linda found her there and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, pulling her into an awkward sideways hug. "I don't know what specifically is wrong," Linda said quietly, "but I know you've been carrying something heavy for a while now. I wish I could fix it for you, sweetheart, but all I can do is tell you that you're stronger than you think you are, and you've survived worse than whatever this is." Astrid leaned into her aunt's shoulder and let herself be held, accepting comfort even though it couldn't actually solve anything. Eventually her tears subsided, and she pulled away, wiping her face with her sleeves. "Thanks, Aunt Linda." "Any time. I mean that. I know I'm not around much because of work, but I'm here when you need me." After Linda left, Astrid pulled out her real sketchbook and began to draw. Not anything specific, just marks on paper, lines and shapes and gradations of tone that expressed feelings too complicated for words. The act of creating was meditative, focusing her scattered thoughts and overwhelming emotions into something tangible. She drew until her hand cramped and her eyes burned with exhaustion, and then she finally fell into bed and slept without dreams. The school issued their statement Tuesday morning, posted on the official social media accounts, and sent in an email to all students and faculty. It was professional and clear. They'd investigated the plagiarism allegations, found them to be without merit, confirmed that Astrid's work was original and developed through proper artistic process, and would be proceeding with her competition submission as planned. The response was mixed. Some students publicly apologized for believing the accusation. Others quietly deleted their shares of the original post. But plenty of people remained skeptical, and the whispers continued in hallways and cafeteria lines. Astrid walked through school with her head up, refusing to show how much it hurt, refusing to retreat back into invisibility, even though every instinct screamed at her to hide. Kieran was a constant presence, sitting with her at lunch, walking with her between classes, making it clear through his public support that he believed in her. Other students from the painting concentration did the same, forming a kind of protective circle that made Vanessa's campaign of social destruction less effective than it might have been. The week leading up to the competition results was torturous. Astrid tried to focus on her regular assignments, on her shifts at Grounded, on anything other than the gnawing anxiety about whether her work would be taken seriously or forever tainted by the plagiarism accusation. She and Kieran spent hours in his studio. He had a larger space than hers, one of the perks of being an upperclassman, working side by side and occasionally taking breaks to talk or to just sit in comfortable silence. One evening, they were sitting on the floor of his studio with takeout containers of Thai food spread between them, and Kieran asked the question she'd been dreading. "What are you going to do if you don't win?" Not because your work isn't good enough, but because the judges let the plagiarism thing influence them. Astrid poked at her pad thai with her chopsticks. "I don't know. Part of me wants to say I'll be fine, that just entering was brave and that's what matters. But honestly, I think I'll be devastated. I put everything into that piece, all my fear and hope and transformation. If people can't see past the false accusation to recognize what's actually there..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Then they don't deserve to see it," Kieran finished for her, "but I think they will. I think your work is so obviously genuine and powerful that no bullshit rumor can overshadow it. You have to say that. You're my boyfriend." The word felt strange and wonderful in her mouth, still new enough to be slightly awkward. "I don't have to say anything. I choose to say it because it's true." He reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Whatever happens with the competition, you've already won in the ways that matter. You stopped hiding. You created something real and true. You refused to let fear control you anymore. That's the actual transformation, Astrid, not whether you get a prize or recognition." She knew he was right, but it was hard to hold on to that perspective when the stakes felt so high. The prize money would make a real difference in her life. The recognition would help her future, and proving Vanessa wrong would be deeply, viscerally satisfying. Friday afternoon arrived with grey skies and the promise of rain. The competition results were being announced at a special assembly in the auditorium at 3 p.m. after classes ended. Astrid sat in the back row next to Kieran, her stomach twisted in knots, while students filed in and the auditorium filled with the typical noise of teenage conversation and restless energy. Mrs. Hendricks took the stage, along with 2 guest judges who'd been brought in from local galleries, to evaluate the competition entries. She gave a speech about the importance of artistic excellence and creative risk-taking, and then began announcing the results. Third place went to a senior who'd created an impressive sculpture about environmental transformation. Second place went to a junior whose painting explored cultural transformation through immigration. Both were excellent pieces that deserved recognition. And then Mrs. Hendricks paused, her expression becoming more serious. First place this year was a difficult decision. We received many strong submissions, and the judging panel spent considerable time in deliberation. We also want to address directly that one submission was the subject of false plagiarism allegations that circulated on social media. After thorough investigation and review of the artist's process work, we can categorically state that these allegations were without any merit whatsoever. The piece in question is original work of exceptional quality, demonstrating both technical mastery and profound emotional depth. Astrid's heart was hammering so hard she thought people nearby must be able to hear it. First place in this year's transformation competition goes to Astrid Winters for her mixed media triptych Chrysalis. The auditorium erupted in applause, and Astrid sat frozen in her seat, unable to process what had just happened. Kieran was pulling her to her feet, pushing her toward the aisle, and she walked down to the stage in a daze. Mrs. Hendricks handed her a certificate and an envelope containing the scholarship check, and the guest judges both shook her hand and offered congratulations that she barely heard over the rushing in her ears. She looked out at the auditorium and saw a sea of faces, some genuinely happy for her, some indifferent, some clearly displeased. She found Vanessa sitting in the middle section, her expression carved from ice, and for a moment their eyes met. Astrid saw fury there, and humiliation, and the promise that this wasn't over. But she also saw something else: defeat. Vanessa had thrown everything she had at destroying Astrid's credibility and reputation, had used every tool of social manipulation and psychological warfare at her disposal, and it hadn't worked. Astrid had won anyway, not because she'd fought back with the same tactics, not because she'd tried to destroy Vanessa in return, but because she'd created something so genuinely excellent that it couldn't be denied or dismissed. After the assembly, students crowded around her offering congratulations, and Astrid tried to be gracious and thankful, even though she wanted nothing more than to find a quiet space and process everything. Kieran stayed close, running interference when people got too overwhelming, until finally they managed to escape to his studio where she could breathe. "You did it," he said, grinning. "You actually did it." "I can't believe it." "I was so sure the plagiarism thing would ruin everything." "Your work was too good. That's what made the difference. The truth was there in every mark on the page." He pulled her into a hug, and she buried her face in his shoulder, allowing herself this moment of celebration and relief. They spent the evening in his studio, not really working, just being together and occasionally looking at the competition prize certificate like it might disappear if they didn't check on it regularly. Eventually, Astrid had to leave for her shift at Grounded, and she walked through the darkening streets with a lightness in her step that felt almost foreign after months of constant tension. Her shift passed quickly, and she was wiping down tables near closing time when a group of students from Roosevelt came in, not anyone she knew well, but people who'd been in the auditorium that afternoon. They ordered drinks, and then came over to her station. "Hey, we just wanted to say your piece was incredible," one of them said, a girl with purple hair and multiple piercings. "Like, genuinely one of the best things I've seen at Roosevelt." "Thank you," Astrid said, genuinely touched. "Also, everyone knows Vanessa was behind that plagiarism post. She's been pulling stuff like that for years, and most of us are kind of glad someone finally beat her at her own game." After they left, Astrid finished her closing duties with a smile. Maybe things really were changing. Maybe she really had found a way through this. The weekend passed peacefully. She deposited her prize check, feeling the surreal satisfaction of having that much money in her account, enough to buy proper art supplies, enough to reduce her work hours slightly, enough to breathe a little easier. She and Kieran went to a movie Saturday evening, something mindless and action-packed that let them just enjoy being together without the weight of school drama. But Sunday evening, as she was working on homework in her bedroom, her phone started blowing up with notifications. Someone had posted something new, and based on the volume of alerts, it was spreading fast. She opened social media with mounting dread and found a post from the same anonymous account that had made the plagiarism accusation. This one was worse, much worse. It was a photo of her real sketchbook, the one she kept hidden in her bag, the one filled with her actual work. Someone had gone through it and photographed pages without her knowledge, and now those images were posted online with a caption that made her blood run cold. More theft? Or just obsessed? Astrid Winter's secret sketchbook shows she's been drawing her boyfriend Kieran Lynch for weeks without his knowledge. Creepy stalker behavior much? The photos showed her detailed portrait studies of Kieran, the ones she'd drawn from memory in private moments, the ones that were personal and intimate and never meant to be seen by anyone else. Taken out of context and presented as evidence of obsessive stalking behavior, they looked damning. The comments were already piling up, some defending her, many more expressing shock and disgust at the creepy behavior, calling her a stalker and worse. Astrid felt like she was going to be sick. This wasn't just an attack on her academic integrity. This was personal, invasive, designed to destroy her relationship with Kieran and paint her as some kind of dangerous obsessive. She immediately called Kieran, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, have you seen the new post?" Silence, which meant he had. "Astrid, it's not what it looks like. I know you're not. Someone went through my bag. Through my private sketchbook. And now everyone thinks I'm some kind of stalker." She was trying not to cry, trying to keep her voice steady, but she could hear it breaking. "I'm coming over. What's your address?" She gave it to him, and he arrived 20 minutes later, slightly breathless from what must have been a fast trip on public transit. They sat on the front steps of her aunt's building because Linda was asleep inside, and Astrid showed him her phone, the post, the comments, all of it. "This is Vanessa," Kieran said, his voice tight with anger. "This has to be Vanessa. She's the only one with enough motivation to keep attacking you like this. She must have gone through my bag when I wasn't watching, or had Bree or Sienna do it, photographed the pages and saved them for the right moment to cause maximum damage. This is beyond normal bullying. This is harassment. This is a violation of your privacy." Kieran took her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm not weirded out or upset. Artists draw people they care about all the time. It's completely normal, and honestly, I'm kind of flattered that you wanted to capture—" He paused, searching for words. "Whatever you saw in me worth drawing." "Really? Really? But that doesn't fix the problem of everyone else thinking you're some kind of creep." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need to fight back, not with the same tactics, but with the truth. We need to tell everyone exactly what's been happening, make it clear this is a pattern of targeted harassment, expose Vanessa's campaign against you. How? She'll just deny it. And her father is on the board. She's protected. Maybe. But she's not invincible, and enough people are starting to see through her behavior that I think we have a chance." Kieran pulled out his own phone. "I'm going to make a post, on my own account, setting the record straight. I'll explain that artists draw people they care about, that there's nothing creepy or stalkerish about what you did, and that this is clearly part of a targeted harassment campaign designed to destroy your reputation. She'll come after you too. Let her. I'm not afraid of Vanessa Cordell." He started typing, and Astrid watched him craft a careful, thoughtful response that acknowledged the situation, defended her behavior as normal artistic practice, and called out the pattern of escalating harassment. He posted it and then looked at her seriously. "We're also going to go to the administration tomorrow. Document everything. The initial threats, the plagiarism accusation, now this privacy violation. We're going to make an official complaint and demand action. Astrid wanted to believe it would help, but she'd been through this before. Adults were often more interested in avoiding conflict than addressing it. What if they don't do anything? Then we escalate. We go to the board of directors. We go to local media if we have to. We make enough noise that they can't ignore it. Kieran wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You're not alone in this, Astrid. Not anymore. They sat on the steps for another hour, watching the reactions to Kieran's post roll in. Many students shared it, adding their own support. Others began coming forward with their own stories of Vanessa's bullying and manipulation, a pattern of behavior stretching back years. The tide was slowly turning, but the damage was still real. Astrid could feel the weight of public exposure, the violation of having her private work shared without consent, the humiliation of being painted as obsessive and creepy. Monday morning arrived too soon. Astrid walked into Roosevelt with Kieran by her side, drawing strength from his presence. They went directly to the administration building and requested a meeting with Mr. Paulson, the Director of Student Affairs. To his credit, he saw them immediately, and they laid out the entire timeline: Vanessa's initial harassment, her threats before the competition, the plagiarism accusation, and now the privacy violation of photographing Astrid's personal sketchbook without permission. Mr. Paulson listened with increasing concern, taking notes. This is serious. If what you're saying is true. It is true, Kieran interrupted. And we can provide evidence. Screenshots of the anonymous posts, time-stamped documentation of when things happened, witness statements from other students who've seen Vanessa harassing Astrid. The challenge, Mr. Paulson said carefully, is that the posts came from an anonymous account. Without direct proof that Vanessa created that account, we can't definitively connect her to these actions. Who else would have motive and opportunity? Astrid asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. She threatened me directly, and then these attacks happened exactly when and how she said they would. That's not coincidence. I understand your frustration. Let me investigate further. In the meantime, I want you both to know that we take harassment and privacy violations seriously. If we can establish a clear connection to Vanessa or any other student, there will be consequences. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Astrid and Kieran left the administration building and headed to their first classes, and Astrid tried to focus on her work, despite the whispers following her through the hallways. The support from Kieran's post had helped, but there were still plenty of students who believed the stalker narrative, who looked at her with suspicion or disgust. In drawing fundamentals, Professor Martinez asked her to stay after class again. When the other students had left, he came over to her workstation with an expression of deep concern. Astrid, I want you to know that I've seen the posts circulating online, and I think it's important you hear this from a faculty member. There is nothing inappropriate or creepy about an artist making studies of people in their lives. Drawing someone you care about, someone whose face and presence interests you enough to want to capture it on paper, is one of the most natural and human impulses in art. Some of the greatest portraits in history were created by artists drawing the people they loved. Astrid felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. Thank you. That means a lot. I also want you to know that several faculty members are aware of what's been happening to you, and we're not comfortable with it. We're having discussions with administration about how to address ongoing harassment between students. This isn't just about you. There are other students who've been targeted over the years, and we're recognizing that we haven't done enough to protect them. After class, Astrid felt marginally better. The faculty support mattered, even if it couldn't undo the damage already done. She met up with Kieran for lunch, and they sat with their usual group from the painting concentration. The conversation was subdued but supportive, and Astrid appreciated that no one pressed her for details or drama. The following days were tense. The administration was conducting their investigation, which apparently involved interviewing multiple students and reviewing security footage from around the time Astrid's bag had been accessed. Vanessa, Bree, and Sienna had been called in separately for meetings, though no one knew what they'd said. The anonymous social media account had gone silent after Kieran's post had shifted public opinion, but the damage lingered. Thursday afternoon, Astrid was in her studio working on a new piece, something abstract and violent, slashing marks and aggressive color that expressed the anger she usually kept carefully controlled, when there was a knock on her doorframe. She looked up to find Vanessa standing there, and every muscle in her body tensed. "Can I come in?" Vanessa asked, her voice oddly subdued. "Why would I let you do that?" "Because I want to talk. Actual conversation, not threats or games." Astrid considered refusing, sending her away, maintaining her protective distance. But she was also curious about what Vanessa could possibly want to say. "Fine. Talk." Vanessa stepped into the small studio and closed the door behind her, which immediately made Astrid nervous. But she didn't retreat, just stood by her workspace and waited. "The administration found security footage," Vanessa said without preamble. "It shows Bree going through your bag in the library last week. They've connected her to the anonymous social media account. She's being suspended for the rest of the semester." Astrid felt a surge of vindication mixed with something more complicated. "Good. She violated my privacy and tried to destroy my reputation." "I know, and for what it's worth, I told her not to do it." Vanessa's expression was strange, somewhere between resigned and defiant. "Not because I suddenly grew a conscience, but because I knew she'd get caught. She's sloppy and overconfident, and I knew it would blow back on us. Us. Don't pretend to be naive. You know I've been behind everything, maybe not directly, but I've been orchestrating the harassment, directing Bree and Sienna, trying to make you miserable enough that you'd leave." Vanessa crossed her arms, defensive body language that contradicted her seemingly honest words. "The administration can't prove it because I was careful not to leave evidence. But you and I both know the truth. So why are you here? To gloat that you won't face consequences? No, to tell you that I'm done." Vanessa looked away, studying the abstract violence on Astrid's canvas. "My father had a meeting with the board yesterday. He was presented with a report documenting 3 years of students transferring out or requesting room changes or filing complaints about a hostile environment, all of it circling back to me and my friends. They can't prove specific incidents, but the pattern is clear enough that they gave my father an ultimatum: get me under control, or they'll ask him to step down from the board." Astrid felt something cold settle in her chest. Not quite satisfaction, not quite sympathy. "So you're only stopping because you got caught?" "I'm stopping because I don't have a choice anymore." My father was furious. I've never seen him that angry. He threatened to pull my funding, to make me transfer to public school, to cut me off completely if I don't stop causing problems. Vanessa's voice was bitter, years of resentment bleeding through. "You want to know the truth? You were right about me. I did all this because you made me feel threatened. Because you came in here with your scholarship and your hidden talent, and you represented everything I'm afraid of, that I'm not actually special, that I only got here because of my father's money, that I'm replaceable. That's not my fault. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I'm just explaining." Vanessa finally looked at her directly. "You won. Your work was better, your resilience was stronger, and you had people who genuinely supported you instead of people who were just afraid to cross me. So you won. I'm done trying to destroy you. Am I supposed to thank you for agreeing to stop tormenting me? No, I don't expect thanks. I don't expect anything. Vanessa moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, your competition piece was exceptional. It deserved to win. And the portrait studies in your sketchbook were really beautiful. You're genuinely talented, Astrid. More talented than I'll probably ever be. That's what I hated most about you, that you're what I wish I could be. She left before Astrid could respond, and Astrid stood alone in her studio, processing the strangest conversation she'd ever had. It wasn't quite an apology, wasn't quite an admission of wrongdoing, but it was something. Acknowledgement, maybe. Recognition of defeat. A ceasefire, even if not quite peace. That evening, Astrid told Kieran about the encounter, and he was skeptical of Vanessa's sincerity. People like that don't just suddenly change, he said. They were in his studio again, comfortable routine, working side by side. She's probably just laying low until the heat dies down. Maybe. But I think she actually was scared of what her father would do. That was real, that fear. Astrid mixed colors on her palette, considering shades of blue. I'm not naive enough to think we're going to be friends, or that she's truly sorry. But I think maybe she'll actually leave me alone now. Not because she's seen the error of her ways, but because she doesn't have a choice. I guess that's better than nothing. The following weeks settled into a new normal. Bree's suspension sent ripples through the school's social hierarchy. Vanessa and Sienna kept notably lower profiles, and other students who'd been targets of their bullying began to speak more openly about their experiences. The administration implemented new policies about harassment and cyberbullying, and while Astrid was cynical about whether they'd actually be enforced, it was at least acknowledgement that there was a problem. Her competition piece was displayed in the main hallway as promised, and she found herself stopping sometimes to look at it with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She'd created that. She'd poured her transformation from hidden to visible into those marks on paper, and people could see it and recognize it and be moved by it. She and Kieran's relationship deepened naturally, built on genuine foundation of shared interests and values. They went to galleries and museums, spent hours in each other's studios, had long conversations about art and life and dreams. He met her Aunt Linda, who approved with the particular relief of a guardian who'd been worried about her isolated niece. She met his family when they came to visit campus, and his younger brother immediately liked her, which Kieran said was the highest possible endorsement. December arrived with cold wind and the first threats of snow. Astrid was working on final projects for her classes, no longer hiding her ability, creating work that was genuinely representative of her skill. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, putting herself out there fully, being seen completely, accepting the vulnerability that came with visibility. One afternoon she was working in her studio when Professor Martinez stopped by with surprising news. Astrid, I wanted to let you know that your competition piece attracted some attention beyond just the school. There's a gallerist who came to our student exhibition opening, and she was particularly interested in your work. She's asked if you'd be willing to meet with her to discuss possibly including you in a group show she's curating for emerging artists. Astrid felt her heart start racing. Are you serious? Completely serious. This is a real opportunity, Astrid. Professional representation, exposure to collectors and critics, the kind of thing that can launch a career if you're ready for it. I don't know if I'm ready. No one ever feels ready, but you're talented enough, and more importantly, you're brave enough. You've already proven that by surviving this semester. He handed her a business card. Think about it. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. After he left, Astrid sat staring at the business card, feeling the weight of possibility. 6 months ago, She'd arrived at Roosevelt determined to hide, to stay invisible, to never let anyone see what she could really do. And now she was being offered a chance to step onto a much larger stage, to put her work out into the world in a professional context. She called Kieran immediately. "I need to talk to you about something." "Good something or bad something, terrifying something," he laughed. "Come to my studio. I'll make coffee." She went, and they sat on the floor of his workspace, while she told him about the gallerist and the opportunity, and her absolute terror at the prospect. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and then gave her the same advice he'd been giving her all semester. "What's the worst that could happen if you do it? I could fail, my work could be rejected, critics could hate it, collectors could ignore it, I could be publicly humiliated on a much larger scale than just school social media." "Okay, and what's the worst that could happen if you don't do it?" "I'd always wonder, always regret not trying, always play it safe and stay small, and never know what I could have been capable of." So which worst-case scenario is actually worse? She knew the answer, had known it even before asking the question. Not trying is worse. "Then I think you know what you need to do." That evening, Astrid sent an email to the gallerist, expressing interest in meeting to discuss the opportunity. The response came the next morning. The gallerist wanted to meet the following week, asked her to bring her portfolio, mentioned that she saw real potential in Astrid's work. Astrid spent the next several days preparing, selecting pieces to show, mounting some of her stronger work professionally, practicing how she'd talk about her process and concepts. Kieran helped, offering feedback and encouragement, making her practice her artist statement until it sounded natural instead of rehearsed. The meeting itself was terrifying and exhilarating. The gallerist, Simone Laurent, had a small but respected gallery in the downtown arts district. She looked at Astrid's portfolio carefully, asked intelligent questions, and finally nodded with satisfaction. "You have raw talent, certainly, but more importantly, you have something to say. Your work has emotional authenticity that's rare in artists at any stage, let alone someone still in school." Simone closed the portfolio. "I'd like to include 3 of your pieces in a group show I'm curating for February. It's focused on emerging voices in contemporary figurative work. You'd be showing alongside several other artists, some more established than you, but all working at a high level. Are you interested?" "Yes, absolutely yes." "Good. I'll send you the details. Dates, requirements, how we handle sales if any of your work is purchased. This is a professional opportunity, Astrid, which means treating it professionally, meeting deadlines, communicating clearly, presenting finished work that's ready for exhibition." "I understand. Thank you for this chance." Walking out of the gallery into the cold December afternoon, Astrid felt like she was floating. She'd done it. She'd gone from hiding in the shadows to stepping into the light, from pretending to be less than she was to claiming her full capability. It had been terrifying and painful, and she'd been hurt along the way. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd transformed. She called Kieran immediately to tell him the news, and his whoop of excitement was loud enough that she had to hold the phone away from her ear. "We're celebrating. I'm taking you to dinner somewhere nice, and we're toasting your success. I haven't actually succeeded yet. The show hasn't even happened. You succeeded the moment you stopped hiding. Everything else is just details." Finals week arrived with its usual stress and exhaustion, but Astrid moved through it with confidence she hadn't possessed at the beginning of the semester. Her portfolio reviews went well. Professors acknowledged the dramatic improvement in her work, praised her technical skill and emotional depth, encouraged her to keep pushing forward. She received high marks in all her classes, maintaining the scholarship requirements easily now that she wasn't deliberately underperforming. The last day before winter break, she was cleaning out her studio and packing up supplies when Vanessa appeared in her doorway one final time. They hadn't spoken since that strange conversation weeks ago, had maintained careful distance from each other, existing in the same school but separate orbits. "I'm not here to start anything," Vanessa said quickly. I heard about your gallery show. Congratulations." "Thanks. I mean it. That's a real achievement." Vanessa leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time she looked uncertain rather than coldly confident. "I'm transferring. After winter break. My father thinks a different environment would be better for everyone, somewhere I can start over without the history." "Is that what you want?" "I don't know, but it's what's happening." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "I know I don't deserve to ask this, but do you think you'll ever forgive me for everything I did?" Astrid considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm still dealing with the consequences of your choices. I'm still working through the trauma of being publicly humiliated and having my privacy violated. So no, I haven't forgiven you yet. I might never fully forgive you, but I don't hate you either. I understand that you were dealing with your own pain and insecurity, and you handled it badly, really badly." "That's fair." Vanessa pushed off from the doorframe. "For what it's worth, I hope your gallery show is successful. I hope you get everything you deserve." After she left, Astrid finished packing up her studio and stood in the empty space for a moment, reflecting on how much had changed. She'd arrived at Roosevelt terrified and determined to hide. She was leaving for break as someone who'd been seen completely, her talent, her vulnerability, her strength, her pain, and had survived it. Had more than survived it, had transformed through it. Christmas break was quiet and restful. She worked shifts at Grounded, saved money, spent time with her Aunt Linda, and worked on pieces for the gallery show. Kieran went home to visit his family, but they texted constantly, sharing their days, staying connected even while physically apart. She missed him more than she'd expected to, and realized with some surprise that she'd built something real with him, something that felt substantial and lasting. The new semester started with winter cold and new beginnings. Astrid returned to Roosevelt to find the social landscape had shifted significantly. With Vanessa gone and Bree suspended, the rigid hierarchy that had dominated school culture had loosened. Other students felt safer being themselves, expressing their opinions, standing up for each other. The changes weren't dramatic or sudden, but they were real. She and Kieran fell back into their routines, working in studios together, going to galleries on weekends, supporting each other through the demands of their classes. She met other artists through the gallery connection, began building a network of creative people outside just the school environment. Her confidence grew gradually, built on the foundation of genuine skill and hard-won self-knowledge. The gallery show opened on a Friday evening in February. Astrid arrived early with Kieran and her Aunt Linda, all of them dressed up and nervous and excited. Simone had done beautiful work with the exhibition. The lighting was perfect, the wall text thoughtfully written, each piece given space to breathe and be appreciated. Astrid's 3 pieces were grouped together on one wall, and seeing her work in a professional gallery context made her feel simultaneously proud and terrified. People began arriving: collectors, critics, other artists, curious community members. Astrid stood near her work and watched people engage with it, saw them lean in close to examine the details, saw them step back to take in the overall composition, saw them reading the wall text that explained her concepts and process. Some people asked her questions, wanted to know about her technique or inspiration, and she found herself able to talk about her work with confidence she'd had to fake at the beginning of the semester, but that now felt genuine. One couple looked at her competition piece, the triptych about transformation that had started everything, for a long time, discussing it quietly between themselves. Eventually, they found Simone, and Astrid saw them gesturing at her work, clearly asking questions. Simone brought them over to meet her. "Astrid, this is Marcus and Jennifer Chen. They're interested in purchasing your piece, her piece. Someone wanted to buy her art. Actual collectors were willing to pay money for something she'd created." The conversation that followed was professional and slightly surreal. They discussed price, framing, installation considerations, and eventually agreed on terms. Astrid would receive her portion of the sale after the gallery took their commission, and it was more money than she'd expected, enough to fund supplies and reduce her work hours for months. After the Chens left with plans to pick up the piece after the show closed, Astrid stood with Kieran and her aunt, trying to process what had just happened. "You sold your first piece," Kieran said, grinning enormously. "You're a professional artist now. That's the definition. Someone who sells their work." "I can't believe it. This is real. This actually happened." Linda pulled her into a hug, and Astrid felt tears threatening for entirely different reasons than the ones that had plagued her earlier in the year. These were tears of accomplishment and recognition, and the overwhelming sense that she'd actually done something real, something that mattered, something that proved all the struggle had been worth it. The gallery show ran for 6 weeks, and during that time Astrid sold all 3 of her pieces to different collectors. Simone asked if she wanted to do a solo show the following year, once she'd built up more inventory. Professor Martinez recommended her for a prestigious summer program at an arts intensive in upstate New York. Other opportunities began appearing, each one building on the last, creating momentum that felt both exciting and terrifying. She navigated it all with Kieran by her side, with the support of faculty who believed in her, with her aunt's steady presence and encouragement. She made new friends among other artists in the gallery scene, built connections with people who understood the particular combination of vulnerability and courage required to make and share creative work. The transformation that had begun with Vanessa's bullying, that had been forced through pain and public humiliation and the violation of her privacy, had led her to this place where she was finally becoming who she'd always been capable of being. Not just a talented artist, but someone who wasn't afraid to show what she could do, someone who understood that visibility came with risks, but also with possibilities. Someone who'd learned that hiding meant safety, but also meant never fully living. Spring arrived with early warmth and the promise of renewal. Astrid walked through Roosevelt's hallways now with her head up, exchanging greetings with other students, no longer trying to disappear. She'd kept her studio space sparse and minimal, but she'd added a few personal touches, photos of her and Kieran, a print of one of her mother's old drawings, cards from collectors who'd purchased her work. One afternoon in late March, she was working in her studio on a new piece, something ambitious and large-scale that she was developing for her next gallery opportunity, when she heard familiar voices in the hallway. She looked up to see a small group of first-year students passing by, and one of them was clearly distressed. The others were laughing, making comments, the unmistakable pattern of bullying beginning its familiar cycle. Astrid put down her brushes and stepped into the hallway. "Hey, is everything okay?" The group fell silent, surprised by her intervention. The student who was being targeted, a boy with thick glasses and a nervous demeanor, looked at her with desperate hope. The ones doing the bullying shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing her even if they didn't know her personally. "We're just talking," one of them said defensively. "Didn't look like talking." "Looked like you were making someone uncomfortable for your own entertainment." Astrid kept her voice calm but firm. "Whatever is happening here needs to stop, now." There was a tense moment of standoff, and then the bullying students mumbled some excuse and walked away quickly. The targeted student remained, looking at Astrid with gratitude and residual fear. "Thank you," he said quietly. It's been happening for weeks. I know how that feels. Listen, you don't have to deal with this alone. There are people who will help, faculty, administration, other students, and if you need someone to talk to, someone who's been through it, I'm around. Studio 2B. My name's Astrid. I'm Daniel. And thank you. Really. She watched him walk away, his posture slightly straighter, and she felt something settle into place inside herself. This was part of her transformation too, not just learning to stand up for herself, but learning to stand up for others, using her visibility and strength, not just for her own protection, but to create safety for people who were where she'd been months ago. That evening, she told Kieran about the encounter, and he smiled with a mixture of pride and affection. You're becoming a force for good in this place. I'm just trying to make sure other people don't have to go through what I went through. If I can use my experience to help someone else, then maybe it all meant something beyond just my personal growth. It already meant something, but this makes it even better. As the semester drew toward its close and summer approached, Astrid reflected on everything that had changed. She'd arrived at Roosevelt determined to hide, to protect herself through invisibility, to never again risk the pain of being fully seen. And then circumstances had forced her hand. Vanessa's bullying, Kieran's support, the competition that had required her to choose between safety and authenticity. She'd chosen authenticity, even when it was terrifying, even when it meant being targeted and attacked and violated. And yes, it had been painful. Yes, she'd suffered. But she'd also discovered that she was stronger than she'd known, that being seen fully was better than being safe but hidden, that the people who mattered would see her talent and value it rather than resent it. She'd learned that true transformation wasn't just about changing how others perceived her, it was about changing how she perceived herself. Moving from someone who believed she had to hide to survive, to someone who understood that real survival meant living fully and openly despite the risks. Her mother would have been proud, she thought, would have recognized the courage it took to stop protecting herself and start living authentically, would have understood that the greatest art came from that place of vulnerable truth-telling, from the willingness to be seen completely. The final day of spring semester arrived with perfect weather and the bittersweet feeling of endings and new beginnings. Astrid packed up her studio for the summer. She'd been accepted to that intensive program Professor Martinez had recommended. 2 months of focused artistic development in an environment designed specifically for emerging talents. Kieran would be doing a different program across the country, and they'd have to navigate their relationship long distance for the summer. But they'd already talked through it and felt confident they could make it work. As she carried the last box of supplies to her car, she passed the main hallway where her competition piece had been displayed for months. It had been taken down now, purchased and delivered to the collectors who'd bought it. But she paused at the empty space anyway, remembering what it had felt like to see her work exhibited there, to have created something that couldn't be dismissed or ignored or destroyed. Someone had ripped her painting once, torn apart her work, tried to destroy her talent through physical violence against her art. But she'd learned since then that the real power wasn't in the physical object. It was in the ability to create, to keep creating, to produce beauty and truth even after being hurt, to transform pain into something meaningful and lasting. Vanessa had tried to destroy her, had used every weapon of social manipulation and psychological warfare available, had violated her privacy and attacked her reputation, and done everything possible to make her quit and leave and disappear. But Astrid had won, not through revenge or retaliation, but through resilience, through continuing to create, through choosing authenticity over safety, through refusing to let fear control her life. That was the real transformation, she realized. Not from hidden to visible, though that was part of it, not from victim to victor, though that too played a role, but from someone who believed the only safe choice was to make herself small, to someone who understood that the greatest courage was choosing to be fully yourself, even when being yourself meant being vulnerable to harm. She got in her car and drove away from Roosevelt, heading towards summer and new experiences and whatever came next. Behind her was a year of pain and growth and discovery. Ahead was uncertainty and possibility, and the ongoing work of becoming who she was meant to be. But in this present moment, driving through the late afternoon with warm air coming through the windows and music playing softly, she allowed herself to feel satisfaction. She'd survived, she'd transformed, she'd learned to create beauty not despite the cruelty she'd experienced but because of it, channeling pain into art that moved people and told truth and made the world just slightly more beautiful than it had been before. That was revenge enough. Not destroying the people who'd tried to destroy her, but becoming so fully herself that their attempts at destruction had only revealed her strength, winning through beauty, transforming suffering into art, choosing over and over again to create rather than to hide. She thought about Daniel, the first-year student she'd intervened for, and hoped he'd find his own path through whatever he was facing. She thought about other students at Roosevelt who were struggling with their own battles against bullies and insecurity and fear. She thought about everyone who'd ever been made to feel small or worthless or like they had to hide the best parts of themselves to survive. For all of them, and for herself, she made a silent promise. Keep creating, keep showing up fully, keep choosing courage over comfort, keep transforming pain into something beautiful. Keep being living proof that the people who try to destroy your light only end up revealing exactly how bright it shines. The sun was setting as she pulled up to her aunt's apartment building, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange that would have been impossible to capture on canvas, but that filled her with the familiar urge to try anyway. She grabbed her boxes and headed inside, already thinking about the work she'd create this summer, the pieces she'd develop for her eventual solo show, the ongoing project of becoming an artist who wasn't afraid to be fully seen. Transformation, she'd learned, wasn't a single moment or decision. It was a process, ongoing and imperfect, full of setbacks and breakthroughs, and the daily choice to keep moving forward, even when moving forward meant walking into uncertainty. She'd transformed over the past year, but she'd keep transforming for the rest of her life, keep learning and growing and discovering new dimensions of herself, and through it all, she'd keep creating, keep making beauty in a world that often felt harsh and cruel. Keep telling truth through images and marks on paper. Keep choosing visibility over safety, authenticity over protection, courage over fear. That was the real victory. Not defeating her enemies, but becoming so fully herself that their attempts to diminish her had only made her stronger, brighter, more determined to shine, winning not through destruction, but through creation, transforming not just herself, but the space around her, making room for others to be brave, to stand up, to refuse to be made small. Astrid carried her boxes up to the apartment, thinking about the blank canvases waiting for her, about the ideas already forming in her mind, about the work she'd create to capture this feeling of hard-won triumph and bittersweet victory. She'd paint it all, the pain and the growth, the fear and the courage, the darkness and the light that came after. She'd create beauty from the ashes of what had tried to destroy her. That was her revenge, her victory, her transformation. And it was enough.